Morning, everyone. Anybody that knows the Centre for Cities knows that we're quite into our league tables and ranking of different cities. And I think maybe we should start one about the most people in a room talking about LEPs. And for certain, I think Leeds City Region would be number one in that. I've never seen that many. I didn't know there were that many people that were interested in LEPs in any one place. I just thought it was a bunch of anoraks like me that were really interested in a LEP. So that gives me some confidence that maybe we aren't entirely wasting our time when we talk about LEPs. So I've been asked just to give a few reflections at a general level about where we are in terms of cities, city regions, and their importance to the economy. And then just to give one or two, maybe a few more than that, reflections on what we've read, what we've listened to in terms of the plan as it currently is in this part of the world. Maybe there's some challenges in there as well that we could just touch on during the rest of the day. Let me echo this point that has been made already. Leeds City Region does matter, no doubt about it, but it definitely doesn't matter as much as it should. And that presents a challenge for you all in the room, obviously, because that affects wages, that affects productivity, that affects quality of life, that affects how people feel and want to work and operate in this area. But interestingly, and I'll finish on this in my 10 minutes, it presents some real challenges for government. Because in a sense, if the Leeds City Region doesn't perform over the short, medium and longer term, then that has real serious implications for national government of whatever persuasion is. So there's a kind of interest in there that Leeds City Region is a place that we need to focus on both within the place, but actually we need to think about that from outside of it as well. So let me start with one or two general. They'll all be obvious points, but hopefully you can just get a sense as to where I'm going. So the first point to make generally is that cities and their hinterlands, the city regions, are increasingly important at a national level and an international level. Most people live within city regions. Most economic activity takes place in cities. And that is a growing concentration and a growing level of importance. It's more important for the service economy than it is for the manufacturing economy. Interestingly, our core cities, the core of our cities, are more important for higher end uses than they are for lower end uses as well. So we kind of think about some of those issues. And the reason why is because actually, ironically, perversely, as things like social media and others that we see on the wall there begin to flourish, actually that reinforces this notion of the value of face-to-face contact, of bringing people together physically to discuss very complex issues. In a sense, you cannot convey complexity in any meaningful way virtually. You have to ultimately do it physically, and that presents some real challenges, some real opportunities for our cities. So those kind of thinking around the world increasingly becoming flat, you can do business wherever you are, is actually proven to be untrue. And essentially, the values that cities and city regions bring are threefold. One is proximity, the second is density, and the third is variety. And particularly where they get it right, it's about related variety. And for any economists in the room, you recognize this term, but we class that. The benefits that cities accrue is what we call agglomeration. The benefits from agglomeration, the benefits from bringing activity together in relatively smallish areas, and the benefits that you get. Crudely, 1 + 1 hopefully equals 3. And therein is one of the challenges in this part of the world as to whether 1 + 1 equals 2 or whether actually we can get it to equal 3. And if we do, then we'll see the outcomes in terms of productivity levels will increase, wages will increase, skills will increase, the workforce will be more productive and more effective. Then that presents us with another point to reflect on, this point of the returns to scale and the increasing returns to scale. There's some evidence in this country that actually our cities below London, in that middle tier, and Leeds would be one of those, are actually too small. The evidence should suggest, if we look at other distribution of settlements around the world, that Leeds and other cities below London should be somewhat larger, which presents some interesting challenges, right? We can either grow our cities, we can expect Leeds to become 1 million and Bradford to become 20% larger than it currently is, or we can find ways of introducing scale by getting connectivity between places across city regions, which has a series of implications for the way that we think about policy. And that also links to my final general point, which is actually city regions are networks of places, places that have relationships with each other and have roles and contributions that they play. We shouldn't think about city regions essentially as having holding places that are islands. They are not made up of distinct islands. They are made up of places that have relationships and responsibilities and contributions to each other. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative or not so positive, and the challenge there for us is to increase the positive ones and deal with the negative. We can't think about Leeds without thinking about its relationship and its contribution to Bradford and to Selby and to Skipton and vice versa. It makes no sense for us to think about Skipton without thinking about how its relationship is affected by and benefits from Leeds. And that's part of the challenge, I think, here in the sense of thinking about those sorts of places. So relationships between places is more important, I think, in some ways, at least as important to thinking about places as individual entities. So let me just touch very briefly on one or two specifics that I'll just rush through because of time we can pick up in the panel. The first point, rightly, is there a value in having the plan, an economic development strategy? One looks like the other. They broadly say the same kind of things. Everybody claims to be world-class in something or other, but nevertheless, there is an element of truth. Well, actually, when we look at this Leeds City region, then this is a compliment rather than a criticism. It's actually, in some ways, boringly realistic. And that's a good thing. In a sense, I think the evidence base, the analysis that underpins it is strong, robust, and appropriate. And from that, some of the priorities and statements that have been made about where you are, but also what you want to focus on, are realist, and they're based on what you understand. So there's a value in that. But actually, more broadly, the value of plans and strategies is actually to provide, at least where we can, some certainty and stability, in a sense, to allow investors and developers and businesses and entrepreneurs to broadly understand what we're trying to achieve over the longer term, and then to invest and do the things that they want to do with the stability that things aren't going to change. So one of my things is that whilst we constantly want to make sure that the plan and the strategy are still right, we don't want to be every 2, 3, 5 years essentially throwing everything out and starting again. And that's certainly been a criticism of some previous approaches, not necessarily in this region, but in others, in that every 5 years we start all over again. That provides no certainty. Secondly, while sector focus and sector specifics are important, we must focus equally on the general conditions of activity. So it's right to say that you have some sectors that you're already strong in, and there are some sectors that are emerging, but actually we need to think about why they're emerging and actually the things that we can do about it. Much of the evidence suggests that whilst you may have strengths in certain sectors, sector policies actually are relatively inconsequential in affecting the longer-term development of those sectors. And it goes back to this point I was saying earlier on. The evidence seems to suggest that related variety is more important. So in a sense, thinking about sectors, but actually thinking about how they sit within the broader business environment and the value that they get, so the value that biotech gets from being closely associated with life sciences or with the creative and digital. In a sense, it's the crossover that drives economic change and innovation rather than specialization within sectors. So focus on the general as well as the specific. Think about related variety rather than sector-specific activity. Secondly, you have to accept, as difficult as it is, that there is an increasing and ongoing sorting of activities across the city region. You see low-skilled and high-skilled beginning to move. Increasingly, our urban cores are becoming places for high-skilled work. Lower-skilled service work is being pushed out onto the hinterlands. That's an important longer-term trend. Secondly, you see issues around where front office and back office activities are positioning themselves. Back office where cost and land availability is often an issue, tend to be where they're served on the outer skirts of our cities, our places. We need to think about sector structures. In a sense, if you look across this particular city region, you can quite clearly see segmentation around the financial and services industries and indeed the retail industry. Think about the different offers that different places have. They are relatively longer-term trends that we need to be mindful of when we then think about the relationships and roles of different places in this particular city region. Importantly, Neil touched on it, we need to think about prioritization. And that's about thinking about some real tough choices about what to invest in and then affected by that, where to invest. And I know for those that were involved, the decision-making process that led to the identification and promotion and ultimately the award of the enterprise zone was a difficult and fraught process. That is the type of prioritization and the difficult type of questions that will need to be made on a repeated and consistent basis, which means two things. One, an open, robust, transparent process for identifying those priorities, being clear about how we result and we come to those priorities. And that's a challenge on a technical basis for those that are doing the appraising, but certainly that is a challenge for the politicians in the room, in a sense of being able to enter into those kind of conversations where priorities may not be in your patch, and maybe thinking about how investment in other parts of the city region ultimately benefit your part of the city region. Not an easy agenda. It's easy for me to stand here and say it. I fully recognize some of the issues, but nevertheless, finding your way through that challenge to identify their priorities that make a difference is going to be very important.